Hello, my friend. The world of magic, filled with legends and ancient tales, is opening its gates once again. Tonight, in the Gryffindor dormitory by the crackling fireplace, I will share another story with my friends. Join us, for the magic is about to come alive.
Far out in the northern sea, where no ship dared sail and no bird dared fly, there stood a jagged island that seemed carved from night itself. The waves that crashed against its cliffs were black as ink, and the wind that howled around it carried voices, thin, despairing cries that made even the bravest hearts falter. Long before anyone called it Azkaban, it had another name, one the time itself had swallowed. The island had been the home of a sorcerer, so feared that even in death he was whispered about in secret. Ecrisdus. Few in the wizarding world remembered Ecrisdus anymore. The Ministry of Magic's oldest records spoke only in fragments of a man who had loved the sea but sought to master it, who had built a fortress not to defend himself but to imprison what no other wizard dared summon. When he vanished, his island remained, silent and shrouded in storms that never ceased. Centuries passed. The sea routes near the island became treacherous. Sailors told tales of sudden chills that froze their very breath, of shadows gliding beneath the waves, and of whispers that promised rest to the weary. Rest that never came. Ships that strayed too close vanished without a trace. Those few who returned were found babbling nonsense, their eyes hollow, as if something had drained the light from within. It was this mystery that drew the attention of the ministry. Reports from northern traders had grown too many to ignore. Something dark was stirring, something that defied the laws of magic. And so, one blustery dawn, a small team of ministry explorers gathered at the edge of the North Sea, preparing for a voyage most would have fled from. Leading them was R. Edgar Vane, a man known for his calm courage and his sharp sense of right and wrong. He had fought dark wizards before, but even he felt uneasy about this mission. The air itself seemed colder the closer they drew to the sea. At his side stood Marilla Crane, a young but brilliant magical historian whose fascination with the past often led her into danger. She believed that hidden knowledge was the key to protecting the future, no matter the cost. The rest of the crew were quiet. 2 ministry guards, a healer named Callum Hart, and a weathered sailor who had agreed to guide them, though his hands trembled whenever he glanced at the horizon. "It's just another island," Edgar said, as they boarded the enchanted vessel that would carry them through the storm. His voice was steady, meant to reassure the others. Yet he felt something, an unseen weight pressing against his chest, as though the sea itself did not wish them to come. Marilla gave a small smile, her eyes bright beneath her hood. Every legend begins with someone saying that, you know. The journey was grueling. Storms rose without warning, slamming against the ship like living things. The winds screamed, tearing at sails, woven with charms strong enough to withstand dragons. The sea below was a churning mass of black water and pale foam, and more than once the crew swore they saw figures moving in the depths, pale, drifting shapes that vanished when looked at directly. On the 3rd night, as lightning flickered across the sky, the island finally came into view. A towering fortress stood at its heart, its walls twisted and dark, rising from the cliffs like the bones of some ancient beast. No light shone from within, and no life stirred on its surface. Only the unending roar of the storm surrounded it. The sailor guiding them crossed himself, muttering a prayer. "We shouldn't be here," he whispered. "This place, it remembers." "Remembers what?" Marilla asked softly. He didn't answer. He only turned his gaze away, eyes wide with fear. When the ship docked against the rocky shore, the wind fell eerily still, as if holding its breath. The crew disembarked in silence. Their footsteps echoed against the stone, hollow and strange. Edgar drew his wand. "Stay close. We'll set camp inside the outer walls before nightfall." But as they passed beneath the massive gate, a sudden chill washed over them. It was not the cold of the wind or sea. It was deeper, like a shadow, pressing against their souls. The air felt heavy, suffocating, and for a moment the torches flickered blue. Marilla's hand tightened around her journal. "Do you feel that?" "Yes," Edgar said quietly. "It's not natural." They reached the courtyard, where the stones were cracked and overgrown with black moss. A rusted chain lay coiled near the center, fused to the ground by ancient magic. On the far wall, strange runes shimmered faintly, a language so old it seemed to hum within the bones. Marilla knelt beside them, her eyes alight with awe. "It's older than the founders themselves," she breathed. "This is real history, Edgar. Acrisdus's fortress. It's all here." "History doesn't make the dead whisper," muttered one of the guards, glancing nervously at the shadows. Night came swiftly. The sky darkened, the stars vanished behind thick clouds, and the fortress seemed to breathe, slowly, almost imperceptibly. Edgar posted watches and ordered the others to rest, though none could sleep. Strange sounds echoed through the corridors, soft, dragging noises, and once the faint sound of sobbing that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Marilla sat by the campfire writing in her journal. Her quill trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. "He experimented with the soul," she murmured to herself. "The ancients called it animus magia, forbidden work even in his time. But what if—" "Don't finish that sentence," Edgar said quietly from across the fire. "Some things are meant to stay buried." Outside, the wind rose again, carrying with it a distant, hollow cry. The sound froze every heart that heard it. Somewhere deep within the fortress, something had awakened. Dawn came gray and hollow. A wan light crept through the cracks in the fortress walls, glinting on the mist that rolled from the sea. The explorers rose stiffly from uneasy sleep, each of them pale and silent, as if the night had drained their very spirits. The campfire had burned itself to ash, though Edgar was certain it should have lasted until morning. The torches had gone out too, one by one, until only the faintest blue glow had remained, like a dying heartbeat. "Something moved through here while we slept," Marilla said. Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled as she examined the ground. In the soot lay long, narrow trails, almost like fingers dragged through the ashes. Edgar's jaw tightened. "No prints, no tracks, nothing living." "Perhaps not living," murmured Callum the healer. He touched one of the marks and drew his hand back quickly, shivering. Cold as death. The fortress loomed above them, its high towers swallowed by fog. They had pitched camp within the outer yard, but beyond the gate lay the keep itself, a gaping archway descending into darkness. It seemed to breathe, drawing the mist inward with every gust of wind. Marilla's eyes were alight with fierce curiosity. If this truly was Acrisdus's home, the archives will be in the heart of the keep. Spells, records, artifacts, proof of everything. And if it's cursed, Edgar asked, then it's the ministry's duty to make it safe, she countered. You said so yourself. He couldn't argue with that, though he didn't like how her eagerness outpaced her caution, so they pressed on. The entrance was sealed by a great iron door, half rusted and half fused with salt and magic. Edgar raised his wand. Alohomora. The ancient lock shuddered but did not yield. A second spell cracked the hinges, releasing a deep groan that echoed through the courtyard like a sigh. The air that poured from within was colder than ice. Inside, the corridor stretched, long and narrow, lined with carvings that seemed to shift when one wasn't looking. Figures etched into the stone, robed shapes with hollow faces, watched them pass, their blank eyes glinting faintly in the torchlight. As they advanced, their breath misted before them. The walls were damp and slick, and every sound, their footsteps, their breathing, seemed louder than it should have been. At last they reached a vast chamber, circular and high-ceilinged. A shattered throne stood at its center, built from black stone veined with silver. Behind it hung a tattered banner, its symbol long faded. Marilla knelt, tracing the runes carved into the dais. It's a containment ward, she whispered, but this design, it's not meant to keep something out. Edgar frowned. Then what was it meant for? She hesitated, eyes wide. To keep something in. Before he could answer, a whisper coiled through the chamber. It wasn't a voice, not exactly, but a sound that brushed against the edges of thought. The torches flickered, shadows dancing wildly across the walls. Callum gasped and staggered back. Did you hear? Edgar held up a hand for silence. The sound grew stronger, like the sighing of wind through hollow bones. Then, clearer now, a word formed. Leave. The flame in Marilla's torch went out. Darkness swallowed her. She cried out, and Edgar swung his wand toward her voice. Lumos Maxima. Light burst through the room, blinding white. For an instant they all saw it, a shape gliding through the air, tall and thin, its face hidden beneath a hood. The light passed through it, as though it were made of mist, yet where it moved, frost bloomed across the stones. Then it was gone. The torches sputtered back to life. Marilla clutched Edgar's arm, her face pale as parchment. It touched me, just for a second. It felt... She shivered violently. Empty. Callum moved quickly, checking her pulse. No wound, but her warmth is fading. Edgar's voice was steady, though his heart raced. We returned to camp. Now. They fled the hall, their footsteps echoing too loudly, chased by the sound of the wind, or perhaps something more. When they reached the courtyard, the air seemed warmer, yet none of them could shake the feeling that they were being watched. That night, no one slept. Marilla lay wrapped in blankets near the fire, shivering. Her eyes were open but distant. It whispered to me, she said faintly. Not words I understood, just hunger. What was it? One of the guards whispered. Edgar stared into the flames. A remnant, maybe. A ghost twisted by dark magic. Not a ghost, Marilla murmured. It's worse. Ghosts remember who they were. As the night deepened, the temperature fell again. Frost crept over the stones. The fire hissed and died, though no wind stirred. Edgar rose and drew his wand, his breath forming clouds in the air. Show yourself, he commanded. The darkness shifted. From the far edge of the courtyard, something moved, a pale shimmer, almost invisible, gliding soundlessly closer. Then another and another. Shapes like tattered cloaks drifted from the shadows, drawn by warmth and life. The air thickened with despair. The guards fell to their knees, gasping as though the joy was being sucked from their lungs. "Patronus charm," Edgar shouted. "Expecto patronum." Silver light burst from his wand, forming a great shining hawk that drove the shadows back. They shrieked, a sound like rusted iron scraping stone, and retreated to the fortress walls, their forms twisting. When the light dimmed, the courtyard was empty again. Edgar lowered his wand, trembling. "They feed on happiness," he said slowly. "They feed on us." Marilla's voice was weak but clear. "They're drawn to emotion, to memory. He created them, Edgar. Echrisdis created them." The healer stared at her. "Created them? How could any man—" She looked toward the fortress, where the shadows stirred faintly once more. "He studied the soul, tried to separate the good from the evil within it. But what if he tore away everything light and left only the hunger?" A silence fell over them. Even the sea seemed to hold its breath. Edgar knew then that they had uncovered something ancient and dreadful, something that should never have been found. Yet leaving was no longer simple. Their ship was gone, torn from its moorings, dragged into the black waters below. The island had claimed them, and from deep within the keep, the first true cry of the creatures rose, a hollow wail that echoed through the night, chilling the marrow in their bones. The Dementors had begun to awaken. Morning came gray and still. The storm had broken, yet the air remained heavy with mist, as though the island itself exhaled sorrow. No waves struck the cliffs now, only a sluggish tide whispering against the stones. The explorers gathered near the ruined gate, hollow-eyed and wordless. Their ship was gone. Nothing remained but splintered wood scattered along the rocks. The sea beyond was calm, deceptively so, stretching endless and lifeless toward the horizon. Edgar Vane stood staring at it, his wand in hand, his cloak flapping lightly in the faint wind. "They don't want us to leave," he said quietly. Marilla sat nearby, her journal open on her knees. Her skin was pale, her movements slow, as though the touch of the creature still clung to her. She looked up, her voice a whisper. "I don't think they understand want. They only hunger." Callum the healer moved among the others, muttering charm after charm to keep their spirits warm. Yet every spell seemed to fade too quickly, as if the island devoured magic itself. Even his eyes, once bright with calm patience, had dimmed. The group spoke little that morning. Fear had settled among them like a living thing. Each shadow seemed to move. Each whisper of the wind sounded like the faint rustle of tattered cloaks. "We can't stay in the open," Edgar said finally. "We'll move to higher ground. There's a watchtower above the keep. If we can reach it, we might send a signal." No one objected. It was easier to act than to think. They climbed the inner stairways of the fortress, winding through narrow halls thick with frost and dust. Strange carvings adorned the walls, twisting faces, open-mouthed, as though frozen mid-scream. Sometimes a low murmur echoed through the corridors, not quite words, but the faint suggestion of them. As they passed through a long gallery, Marilla slowed, her gaze fixed on a line of portraits that had somehow survived the centuries. The figures within were not painted as ordinary wizards, but as wraiths, robed, faceless, and crowned with thorns of shadow. She ran her fingers along the edge of one frame. "He was studying this," she murmured. "The transformation between life and spirit. I read about his work once in fragments. They said Echrisdis wanted to capture death, to command it." Edgar stopped beside her. "And he succeeded?" She met his eyes, her own dark with dread. "Yes, but not in the way he hoped. They continued upward until the stairs ended at a heavy door rimed with ice. Edgar raised his wand, murmuring an unlocking charm, but before the spell could take hold, a voice whispered through the cracks, "Why open what must remain closed?" The group froze. The voice was neither male nor female, but a blend of both, echoing, soft, and unbearably sad. Marilla stepped forward despite Edgar's outstretched hand. "Who's there?" she called. Silence. Then slowly the ice cracked. The door swung inward on its own, revealing a narrow chamber filled with dim light. At its center hovered a faintly glowing orb, pale and trembling, suspended above a pedestal carved from obsidian. The others hung back, but Marilla approached. The glow pulsed as she drew near, and faint images began to shimmer within the sphere. Faces, places, fragments of memory. "It's a soul vessel," she breathed. "He trapped part of himself here." This could tell us what he did. Edgar felt his skin crawl. "Don't touch it." But curiosity burned too fiercely in her. She extended a trembling hand, and the moment her fingers brushed the light, it flared. The chamber exploded with cold. The others cried out as wind howled through the room, tearing at their cloaks. Visions burst into Marilla's mind. She saw a tall figure in black robes, his eyes burning like coals. Acrisdus stood within the same fortress, surrounded by bound captives. Their screams filled the air as he drew from them threads of silver mist, their joy, their memories, their very essence, and wove them into formless shadows. He whispered to them, not as a man to his creations, but as a god to his children. "You will be my guardians. You will watch over my kingdom forever." But the shadows had turned on him. They devoured his warmth, his laughter, his soul, until only the cold remained. The last thing she saw was his face as they consumed him, a hollow mask of terror fading into nothingness. The vision shattered. Marilla collapsed, the orb clattering to the floor, and going dark. Callum rushed forward, murmuring healing charms. Her breath came shallow, her skin pale as frost. Edgar knelt beside her. "Marilla, what did you see?" She opened her eyes weakly. He made them from himself, from the pieces he tore from other souls. When he lost control, they fed on him too. They never stopped. Her voice faded, and she slumped into Callum's arms. The others stared at the darkened orb. Inside it, something moved. Just a flicker, a shadow coiling deep within the glass. Then the whisper returned, colder than before. "He fed us. You will feed us too." The torches went out. The cold struck them like a hammer. Edgar shouted for everyone to draw together, but the darkness was alive. Shapes glided from the corners, unseen but felt. Their presence crushing, suffocating, devouring every spark of hope. The guards fell first, dropping their wands as terror hollowed their faces. "Expecto Patronum!" Edgar roared again. His hawk erupted from the wand tip, blazing silver, but its light flickered, weakening. The creatures pressed closer. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw Marilla stir. Her hand reached toward the fallen orb, her lips barely moving. "Containment," she whispered. "The runes." He understood. The runes carved into the dais below were meant to imprison not just Acrisdus's creations, but their essence. If they could reignite the ward, they might trap the wraiths once more. "Callum, get her clear," Edgar shouted. He dropped to the floor beside the runes, tracing the symbols with his wand. "Recludo anima, recludo." The carvings blazed faintly, but the light wavered. One of the shadows lunged. Edgar's Patronus struck it mid-air, scattering it into fragments of smoke. Yet already, more pressed in, their chill gnawing at his strength. He poured every ounce of magic into the runes, feeling the power draw from him like blood. The chamber shook, the air screamed. One by one the wraiths recoiled, their forms dragged backwards, sucked toward the orb. And then silence. The air cleared, the cold lessened, the shadows were gone. Edgar fell to his knees, gasping. The orb glowed once more, faint but steady. Inside it, faint wisps of darkness swirled like trapped smoke. Callum laid Marilla down beside him. She's alive, weak but breathing. Edgar nodded, though exhaustion weighed upon him like lead. He looked around the silent chamber, the frost, the fallen men, and knew this victory was fragile. The things they had sealed were not destroyed, only waiting. From somewhere deep below the fortress, a faint rumble rose like the heartbeat of the island itself. Edgar turned toward it, his face grim. They'll not stay bound forever. Marilla stirred, her voice a whisper barely audible. Then we must never let anyone come here again. Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the last trace of daylight. And in the distance, across the endless black sea, a single gull screamed, a lonely, echoing cry that faded into the cold. The island slept once more, but not in peace. The night deepened around the ruined fortress, a black veil drawn across sea and sky alike. The moon hung hidden, and the stars gave no comfort. Within the ancient walls, only a few torches still burned, their flames thin and pale. Each flicker of light seemed a fragile defiance against the darkness pressing at the edges of sight. Edgar Vane sat beside the fire in the upper hall, sharpening his wand upon a scrap of whetstone, a pointless ritual, but one that steadied his hands. Marilla lay wrapped in furs beside him, her breathing shallow but steady. Callum watched over her, mixing potions from his dwindling supplies. The two surviving guards, Tobias Flint and Arno Dale, kept watch at the broken windows. Their eyes were fixed upon the courtyard below, where mist coiled and shifted like living smoke. No one spoke. Even whispers felt dangerous here, as if the air itself carried secrets best left unspoken. When Marilla finally stirred, the silence broke. "The runes will hold," she murmured weakly, eyes still half closed. "For a time, but not forever." Edgar leaned closer. "Then we'll find a way to strengthen them." She gave a faint, bitter smile. "You don't strengthen darkness, Edgar. You bury it." Before he could answer, Arno called from the window. "Sir, there's something moving below." Edgar rose swiftly, crossing the room in 3 strides. The courtyard lay far beneath them, shrouded in fog. Yet through the haze, faint lights glimmered, bluish, cold, and wandering. "Wandlight?" Tobias asked. Edgar's gut clenched. "No, not wandlight. They're moving without form." He watched, breath held, as the shapes drifted across the courtyard, circling the gate they had used days ago. Then slowly they turned upward, as though sensing his gaze. "Down!" he hissed. The group ducked away from the window. A moment later, the torches flickered and died. Cold swept through the room like a tide. Tobias swore under his breath. "They've found us." Edgar's wand flared with pale silver light. "To the stairwell. We fall back to the lower hall. If we stay divided, we die." They moved quickly, half guided by Edgar's glow. The walls groaned as though the fortress itself resented their movement. Behind them came the sound of breathing, slow, deep, inhuman. The air thickened. Despair clutched at their hearts. Halfway down the stairwell, Tobias faltered. He pressed a hand to his chest, gasping, "I can't breathe." Edgar spun just in time to see one of the creatures gliding from the shadows above. It descended like a shroud, its cloak torn and dripping frost. The air around it turned to ice. Expecto Patronum. The hawk burst forth again, wings blazing white. It struck the creature head-on, driving it back. Yet even as it retreated, two more emerged, silent, relentless. Marilla clutched Edgar's sleeve. We can't fight them here. The containment runes. The lower hall is their anchor. That's where they're weakest. Edgar nodded. Go, I'll hold them. Don't be a fool, Callum snapped, grabbing his arm. You'll be drained before you reach the next stair. Then stay behind me. The stairwell filled with silver light as Edgar's Patronus wheeled and dove, scattering the advancing shadows. The others ran, half stumbling, half sliding down the slick steps. Frost crept over the walls behind them, sealing every stone with thin veins of ice. At last, they burst into the great hall below. The runes still glowed faintly upon the floor, their light dim but steady. Edgar staggered in after them, his face ashen, his breath ragged. The hawk flickered once and vanished. Marilla fell to her knees beside the rune circle. They're drawn to the vessel. If we restore the spell, we can seal them again. But it will take power, more than one witch or wizard can manage alone. Then we'll do it together, Edgar said. The others formed a circle around the runes. Tobias and Arno raised their wands, though their hands shook. Callum steadied Marilla, whispering the incantation under his breath. Recludo anima vincitio aeternum. The carvings flared brighter, pulsing with eerie blue light. The walls trembled. Outside, the wraiths shrieked, a piercing sound that sliced through the air like glass. Then they came, dozens now pouring through the broken gates, their cloaks trailing smoke. They swept into the hall, blotting out the light. Cold and despair filled the air. Edgar shouted over the roar, "Hold the circle." The runes blazed white, sending arcs of light through the room. Wherever the beams struck, the creatures faltered, their forms unraveling. But the magic demanded strength, draining it mercilessly from those who held it. Tobias cried out as his wand cracked. Arno collapsed to his knees, shaking. Almost there, Marilla gasped. Her eyes burned with light now, her hair streaming in the rising wind. The orb at the center of the runes began to spin, drawing the shadows inward. One of the wraiths lunged toward her. Edgar intercepted it, his wand slashing through the air. Expecto Patronum. The hawk burst forth again, but this time its light faltered halfway, its body half shadow. The creature broke through, seizing Edgar in its grasp. The cold hit him like death itself. His thoughts dimmed. He saw flashes of memory, his mother's smile, his first wand, his training as an auror, all fading into grayness. Then Marilla's voice reached him, distant but fierce. "Edgar, remember!" He clung to her voice, forced the last spark of joy he could muster into his wand, and the hawk blazed to life once more. It tore free of the wraith's grasp, scattering it into smoke. The orb flared, brighter and brighter, until the entire hall was filled with searing light. The wraiths screamed, a sound that split the air, and were drawn inexorably inward, their forms twisting into ribbons of black mist. One by one, they vanished into the vessel. Then silence. The light dimmed. The air grew still. Edgar fell to his knees beside the pedestal, his wand smoking. The orb pulsed faintly, dark shapes swirling within like storm clouds. The runes around it now glowed a deep, steady blue. The seal renewed, but the victory was hollow. Tobias lay motionless, his eyes open and blank. Arno crouched beside him, trembling. Callum wiped his brow with a shaking hand. They're gone. For now. Marilla looked at the orb, her expression grim. We didn't destroy them. We only reminded them of their prison. Edgar rose unsteadily, gazing at the frozen walls, at the lifeless faces of his men. Then we make sure this place stays sealed forever. They climbed from the hall in silence, carrying Tobias's body between them. The fortress was quiet now, too quiet. Even the sea had gone still. At the highest tower, they laid the fallen man to rest beneath a crumbled archway. Marilla spoke a few words, her voice soft as the wind. Below, the island slept again, its heart sealed beneath stone and ice. Edgar looked out over the gray sea. No ship will ever come here again. I'll see to it. Marilla nodded faintly. They'll call it cursed. They'll fear it. That fear will keep them away. But as the wind rose once more, carrying the scent of salt and decay, Edgar knew the truth. Fear alone would not hold this island forever. Something older than memory had been born here, something that fed not on blood or flesh, but on hope itself. And though they had bound it once more, it would wait. It would always wait. The days that followed were shrouded in a gloom that never lifted. The sun did not pierce the clouds, and the island remained steeped in an unnatural twilight. A cold mist hung over the waves, drifting like a living veil around the broken towers. The few who yet lived moved through the fortress like ghosts themselves, keeping close to the dwindling fires, speaking little and sleeping less. Edgar Vane scarcely rested at all. He spent his hours pacing the walls, eyes fixed upon the gray sea. Though the wraiths were sealed below, he could not shake the feeling that they still breathed through the stone, that the fortress itself now pulsed with their unseen hearts. At night, he heard faint murmurs rising from the depths, whispers too soft to understand, yet full of longing and hunger. Marilla, still pale but regaining her strength, devoted herself to the study of the runes they had reawakened, her journal filled with sketches and hurried notes, her quill scratching through the silent hours. She had begun to realize that Acrisdis's magic was more intricate than even the legends had told. He didn't only bind their bodies, she murmured one morning as Edgar approached her work table. He wove their essence into the island itself. The fortress draws power from them, and they draw power from it. The seal won't hold forever because the island feeds on their despair. Edgar frowned. Then this place is beyond saving. She closed her journal softly. Perhaps not, but it is beyond cleansing. Whatever he did here, it changed the nature of the land. Even if we left, the corruption would remain. Their words hung heavy between them. Outside, the wind began to rise again, howling against the ramparts. By the third evening, Callum announced that their stores were nearly gone. The sea had claimed their ship, and their food dwindled to crumbs. "We cannot remain here," he said grimly. "If the sea does not take us, the cold will." Edgar nodded. "Then we find another way off this island. There must be a way Acrisdis came and went." The healer gave a hollow laugh. "Do you think he needed boats?" "No," Marilla said softly. "But he was a man, not a god. He would have left some path behind. No dark wizard builds a fortress without escape. So it was that, come the next dawn, they descended once more into the lower halls. The orb still glowed faintly where they had sealed it, its light cold and unblinking. Frost veined the walls. The air hung thick and stale. They moved beyond the rune chamber into a corridor that sloped downward, deeper into the bedrock of the island. The stairs were slick with brine, and the walls glittered faintly where salt crystals had grown. The deeper they went, the colder it grew, until their breath hung like smoke and their fingers stiffened upon their wands. Finally, they reached a vast iron door at the corridor's end. It was covered in runes, older than the others, carved deep and filled with some black metal that seemed to drink the light. Marilla traced the markings with one hand. "It's not a seal," she whispered. "It's a warning." "What does it say?" Edgar asked. Her voice trembled as she read. "Beyond lies the sea of souls. To open is to release what cannot die." Callum drew back. Then we turned back. But Edgar's gaze lingered on the door. "If there's another passage, another way out, it will be through here. Ekrisdis may have left by this path." Marilla hesitated only a moment longer before lifting her wand. "Stand ready." The unlocking spell she spoke was not one taught at the ministry. It was older, drawn from half-lost fragments she had read years before in forbidden tomes. The symbols flared, each rune igniting with blue light, before fading into nothingness. With a deep groan, the door began to open. Beyond lay a cavern vast as a cathedral, its roof hung with jagged icicles that gleamed like fangs. The floor was glassy and black, as though frozen over a lake too deep to see. From far below came the sound of slow, rhythmic breathing, the pulse of the sea itself. And there, in the heart of the cavern, stood a great stone archway that pulsed with faint light. Through its center shimmered a surface like water, but darker, deeper, an enchanted portal that rippled in time with the sound beneath their feet. Edgar stepped forward, his breath visible in the frigid air. "A gateway?" Marilla nodded, eyes wide. "He built it to channel souls. It's how he drew power from the dying. This is where he birthed them." Callum shuddered. "Then we should destroy it." "We can't," Marilla said, her voice low. "Destroying it might release everything trapped within, but if we can close it, seal it with the same binding as the runes above, it might never open again." Edgar raised his wand. "Then we finish what he began." They took their places before the arch. Marilla began the incantation, her voice steady but strained. The symbols along the frame flickered to life, each one glowing bright before dimming like dying embers. The air thickened with pressure. The black surface began to ripple faster, flashes of light darting within it. For an instant, Edgar saw faces in that darkness, hundreds, maybe thousands, some human, some twisted beyond recognition. Their mouths opened in silent screams. The spell reached its height. Light burst from their wands, white and pure. The cavern shook violently, shards of ice crashing down from the ceiling. The portal writhed, shrinking, folding in upon itself. Then, just as the last word left Marilla's lips, a scream tore through the chamber, a scream that was not human. The surface of the portal exploded outward. A torrent of black mist poured from it, swirling through the air. Within the mist, shapes moved, shapes with faces and hands and hollow, weeping eyes. Edgar threw up a shield. "Fall back!" The mist slammed against the barrier, cracking it with the force of a hammer. One of the shades slipped through, its long fingers brushing against Callum's chest. He gasped, his breath freezing midair, his eyes wide and sightless. Marilla's spell faltered. "It's too strong. He used this as a conduit between worlds. The dead, the lost, all drawn here." "Then seal it from within," Edgar said. "We can't let them reach the surface." He turned to the others, his face pale but resolute. "Get back to the fortress. Finish the binding there. I'll hold the passage." "Edgar, no." Marilla's voice broke, but he was already moving. He stepped into the heart of the storm, raising his wand high. The light from it flared brilliant silver, illuminating the faces swirling around him. "Expecto Patronum," he roared, and the hawk burst forth once more. Vast, radiant wings spread wide. It collided with the mist, its light slicing through the darkness. For a moment the tide faltered. The shades screamed, recoiling. Marilla, tears streaking her frozen face, began the final seal. The runes upon the arch flared to life one last time, blazing with white fire. "Edgar," she cried. He looked back once, the silver hawk wheeling above him like a guardian star. Then the light swallowed him. The gateway imploded, collapsing in upon itself with a thunderous roar. The shock wave threw Marilla and the others to the ground. When the light faded, the arch was gone. Only a scorched circle remained, its center filled with solid stone. For a long time, none of them spoke. The cavern was still. The breathing of the sea had ceased. Finally, Marilla whispered, "He sealed it from the inside." They climbed back toward the surface in silence. The fortress was quiet now, the air lighter somehow, though the chill remained. The orb in the hall glowed softly, as though in mourning. At dawn, the mist lifted just enough for Marilla to see the horizon. Far away through the clearing haze, a single ship moved toward them, ministry sails white against the gray. Edgar's body was never found, but when the rescuers came, the island's new name was already upon their tongues, Azkaban, the Isle of Despair, and beneath its stones, where no light could ever reach, the creatures he had fought still slept, dreaming of the warmth they had once stolen, waiting for the day they would feed again. Many years passed before another wizard dared set foot upon the island. The fortress stood silent through the decades, its towers beaten by wind and rain, its halls echoing only with the sigh of the sea. The stones were blackened by salt, and the gates rusted shut, yet beneath the surface, within the endless cold of the deep chambers, the orb still pulsed faintly, steady as a heartbeat. The darkness waited. In the year that the great goblin uprisings began on the mainland, a ship approached the island once more. It carried 6 men from the early Ministry of Magic, led by the warlock Luthen Corbett, whose courage was matched only by his pride. The ministry had grown strong by then, filled with those who believed no shadow could withstand their laws. The northern seas, however, remained untamed, and stories of a cursed isle haunted every port. Sailors spoke of a place that drained laughter from the heart, where a chill crept into the soul itself. Corbett, ever eager to test his might, sought to uncover the truth. "If ghosts dwell there," he said to his men as their ship neared the island's edge, "we shall bind them. If treasure lies hidden, we shall claim it for the ministry." They landed at dusk. The sea was unnaturally still, and the island's cliffs loomed high above, sharp as broken glass. No bird called, no wave stirred. The silence pressed on them like a physical weight. Corbett and his men ascended the rocky path that wound toward the fortress gate. The runes carved upon the stones had dimmed with age, yet some still shimmered faintly, as though whispering in warning. One of the men, a nervous scribe named Dallin, faltered as they neared the entrance. "Sir," he said quietly, "I've read accounts of this place. The old records say it was the dwelling of a soul mage, a necromancer of terrible power. They say the island itself is alive." Corbett laughed, though his voice held a tremor. "Old wives' tales. The only thing alive here is fear. He drew his wand, murmured a charm, and the massive doors opened with a groan that rolled through the ruins. The air that poured forth was cold as winter's breath. Inside, the great hall still stood, its high vaults cracked but unbroken. A strange light glowed faintly along the walls, seeping from the very stone. As the men advanced, their footsteps echoed endlessly, as if the fortress stretched far beyond what their eyes could see. They came at last to the rune chamber. There, upon its pedestal, lay the orb. Dark, dormant, almost beautiful in its stillness, Corbett approached it with cautious reverence. "A relic of ancient power," he murmured. "This must be what drew the legends, the core of Acrisdus's craft." Dallin hesitated. "Sir, it's pulsing." Indeed, a faint rhythm throbbed within the orb, like something breathing beneath glass. The runes around the dais flared in response, casting long shadows across the walls. "Fascinating," said Corbett, his eyes gleaming. "The magic is still alive." He turned to his men. "Bring it. The Department of Mysteries will study it." But when the first wizard reached for the orb, the runes blazed red. The light struck him full in the chest, and he was thrown backward with a cry. His wand flew from his grasp, clattering against the stone. Dallin rushed forward. "It's warded! Sir, we must leave it be." Corbett only smiled thinly. "No ward can resist forever. The one who cast this is long dead." He drew his own wand, muttered an incantation, and the air filled with the crackle of power. The runes resisted, sparking like lightning. Then, with a final surge, the binding broke. The light died. The orb lay silent once more. Satisfied, Corbett reached out and lifted it from its resting place. At first, nothing happened. Then the temperature dropped. Frost spread outward from the pedestal, crawling across the floor. In branching veins, the torches flickered, their flames turning blue. Dallin whispered, "Sir, behind you." From the shadows near the ceiling, mist began to gather. It poured downward like smoke, coiling through the air. Within it, faint shapes moved, faces without eyes, mouths open in soundless cries. The men stumbled back, their wands raised. "What are they?" one shouted. Corbett's face had gone pale. "Stand firm. They're only echoes." But the first of the wraiths glided forward, its touch brushing the nearest wizard's shoulder. He screamed, and the sound was cut short as his body crumpled, drained of all color. Panic erupted. Spells flew, bright and useless. The creature swept through them like a winter storm. One by one the men fell, their hope torn from them, their joy extinguished. Only Corbett and Dallin reached the gate. The warlock turned, casting one final desperate spell. Protego Maxima. A dome of light flared around them, forcing the wraiths back. "Run!" Corbett shouted. "Get to the ship!" But Dallin did not move. His eyes were fixed on the orb still clutched in Corbett's hand. "You've doomed us," he whispered. "You've set them free." Even as he spoke, the dome began to shatter. The wraiths pressed closer, their hands clawing at the light. Corbett turned to flee, but the ground beneath him cracked with a sound like thunder. The orb split open in his grasp, spilling forth a rush of black mist that swallowed him whole. Dallin fled blindly through the storm, stumbling down the rocky path toward the shore. Behind him the fortress roared with inhuman voices. The mist rose from the windows and towers, curling upward into the night sky. When he reached the sea, the ship was gone, dragged beneath the waves by unseen hands. Alone and terrified, he cast one final charm upon himself, a desperate plea for deliverance. A whirl of wind and magic tore him from the shore, and he vanished into the storm. Days later, a merchant vessel found him adrift on a piece of wreckage, half mad and mumbling about eyes in the dark. He was brought before the ministry, where he spoke of Corbett's folly and the shadowy figures that had risen from the fortress walls. The island, he said, was awake again. The darkness had returned. The ministry sealed his testimony, marking it classified and dangerous. None wished to speak of Azkaban again, but rumors spread regardless of a cursed place where despair itself took form, where no Patronus could fully shine. And so the island was abandoned once more, left to its storms and silence. Yet deep within its ruined heart, the shadows stirred anew. They drifted through the empty corridors, whispering to one another in voices colder than the sea. They remembered the warmth they had once tasted. They remembered Edgar Vane, the one who had bound them, and the soul of Acristis, still faintly pulsing within their prison. But most of all, they remembered hunger. And so, when at last the ministry would return centuries later, seeking a place to hold its worst prisoners, the island would be waiting. Its gates would open gladly, for the fortress had found a new purpose. It would feed again, slowly, patiently, eternally. Thus began the true reign of Azkaban, the tomb of joy and the cradle of the Dementors. The sea around Azkaban became a place of dread and legend. No sailor willingly crossed those waters. The few who did spoke in hushed voices of an isle wrapped always in storm and fog, where the air grew colder with every league, and laughter died upon the tongue. Yet still the Ministry of Magic kept records, maps inked in secrecy, sealed by spells that forbade their mention. For in the age that followed the first rise of Grindelwald's dark followers, whispers began to stir once more about the Fortress of Despair. The records told that after Luthen Corbett's doomed expedition, the island lay empty for nearly 2 centuries. Yet the ministry, ever practical, saw in its isolation a grim usefulness. It was Damocles Rowe, head of magical law enforcement, who first proposed it, an uninhabited fortress where even magic faltered, a prison from which no wizard might ever escape. Rowe's proposal was met with unease. Old historians warned of the island's curse. They spoke of wraiths that drained the very spirit, of chill shadows that wandered even in daylight. But Rowe was a man of law, not superstition. The darkness of the past cannot harm the present, he declared. Azkaban will serve the ministry, not haunt it. And so, in defiance of every warning, a fleet was sent. It was midsummer when the first prison wardens arrived upon the island. The sea was calm, the sky a flawless blue, an omen that seemed to promise safety. Yet as their boats neared the cliffs, the sunlight dimmed. Fog gathered thick and low, and the air grew heavy with cold. By the time the first men reached the shore, the world had turned gray. The fortress loomed above them, vast and lifeless. Iron gates hung crooked on their hinges, and the great doors of the keep stood open as though waiting. Inside, the air was stale, unmoving. The walls glistened faintly with frost, though it was summer. The wardens, 30 men and women strong, lit torches and began their work. They cleared debris, reinforced the walls, and raised new wards. The ministry had sent them with supplies for 6 months and charms of protection against curses. Yet none could shake the feeling that unseen eyes watched them from every shadow. The first to die was a young wizard named Callan Marsh. He was found on the 3rd night, lying near the central hall, his eyes wide and empty. No wound marked him, but his face bore an expression of utter terror. The others whispered that he had seen something, that he had gone to the lower halls and come back hollow. Roe ordered silence. The death was recorded as an accident, but from that night on the cold deepened. Soon the torches began to flicker of their own accord. Food spoiled faster than it should. Some claimed to hear faint weeping in the walls, others the sound of wings. One witch woke screaming that something had breathed upon her ear, something that had whispered her name. The ministry sent for reinforcements, but the storm season came early that year. For weeks, no ship reached the island. And then one night the wraiths returned. They came without warning, gliding through the cracks in the walls, cloaked in darkness. The guards who saw them froze where they stood. Spells failed, patronuses flickered and died. One by one, torches went out and screams echoed through the halls. By dawn, only 7 wardens remained. They huddled in the central keep, too terrified to sleep. One, a witch named Elspeth Dane, whispered through chattering teeth, "They feed on fear. They were waiting for us. We are their harvest." That morning, Roe gave a single command: seal the lower chambers. The survivors worked through the day, binding doors with heavy chains and runes of warding. Yet as they did, they could feel the cold pressing closer, as though the very stones exhaled despair. When rescue finally came weeks later, the rescuers found only 5 still alive. Their eyes were hollow, their minds shattered. They spoke little but repeated one phrase again and again. The darkness obeys hunger, not command. The ministry wished to abandon the project, but Roe refused. The cost had been high, yes, but the fortress had proven inescapable. No prisoner could endure such a place without breaking. So, with grim resolve, Azkaban was opened once more. This time not as a fortress, but as a prison. The first inmates were sent within the year. Dark wizards, murderers, and traitors of the war. None returned. Their cries echoed faintly through the night, carried on the wind that swept across the sea. In time, the ministry realized that the wraiths, the same creatures that had slaughtered the first wardens, no longer attacked the guards. Instead, they lingered near the prisoners' cells, feeding quietly upon the misery that filled those narrow halls. Roe saw this and, in his cold practicality, mistook it for obedience. "They serve the ministry now," he said. "They are our keepers." And thus the ministry made a pact it did not understand. From then on, the wraiths were called Dementors for the despair they brought to any living soul. The guards learned to keep their distance, to move quietly, and to shield their thoughts with happy memories. Even so, many went mad or took their own lives after only a few years of service. The ministry replaced them, never questioning the pattern. The prison expanded, cells multiplied, winding ever deeper into the stone. But with every new wing, the island grew colder. Sometimes the sea itself froze for miles around, ships trapped in sheets of ice. Storms followed no natural rhythm. The sun rarely touched the cliffs, and always at the heart of it, the wraiths moved soundlessly through the corridors, feeding, growing, learning. For though they served, they remembered what they once were. They remembered their birth in shadow, their creator's despair, and the warmth they had lost, and they hungered for it endlessly. Marilla Crane's name was long forgotten by then, her journal sealed away in the Department of Mysteries. Yet had anyone read her words, they would have found one final warning written in her hand. The Dementors are not servants, but echoes. They cannot be ruled, only endured. When the last light fades from their island, they will rise again, and the world will know what true emptiness is. The years turn to centuries. Azkaban became a name that chilled even the bravest auror. The wraiths grew fat on sorrow and fear, and the prison endured as a monument to despair. And so the fortress waited once more, unchallenged, unchanging, and alive. Beneath its stones, the pulse of the old orb still throbbed faintly, calling to those who could hear it. One day, it whispered, someone would come who could break the seal completely, someone whose soul burned bright enough to awaken what slept below. And when that day came, the island would feast as it had not feasted in an age. The centuries that followed turned Azkaban into more than a prison. It became a legend written in dread. Across the wizarding world, parents whispered its name to frighten children into obedience. Oars invoked it in solemn tones, a fate worse than death. Yet none alive truly knew what stirred beneath its black stones, nor that the island itself still remembered the taste of souls. As the Ministry of Magic rose and fell through the ages, Azkaban endured. It weathered wars, coups, and revolutions. When the dark wizard Morgath Thane led his army against the Ministry in the late 14th century, he sent spies to the island to learn its secrets. None returned. Later, when peace was restored, the island's keepers found new prisoners waiting at the shore. Strangers no ship had brought. They were pale, hollow-eyed, and muttering in voices that spoke of endless cold. By the time of the Tudor wizards, Azkaban had become self-sustaining. Few guards remained. The Dementors needed no help. The Ministry found the arrangement convenient. The creatures never demanded payment, never rebelled, never tired. They required only one thing: the endless stream of despair that prisoners carried with them into their cells. Yet even among the bureaucrats of the Ministry, there were whispers that the Dementors had begun to change. Reports told of moments when they gathered together in the upper courtyard, drifting in circles like vultures, whispering in the wind. The guards could not hear their words, but the walls trembled, and frost climbed the pillars like ivy. Still, the Ministry did nothing. "They are our allies," said the Minister for Magic, Basil Frith, a man who valued results over mercy. And allies, however grim, must be tolerated. But far below, deep beneath the lowest cells, where no prisoner had ever been kept, the ancient orb still glowed faintly in its cradle of stone. The runes surrounding it had faded, and cracks ran through the seal. Within the orb, shadows stirred like storm clouds. The pulse that had once lain dormant began to beat again, slow, steady, and hungry. It was on a winter's night in the year 1631 that the balance began to shift. The sea was frozen for miles around, the air so thick with mist that even the stars vanished. Inside the fortress, a young warden named Ronan Blythe made his rounds. He was new to the post, scarcely more than a boy, though already his face bore the pale, weary look shared by all who served too long in Azkaban. He paused by a narrow window slit, gazing out at the endless fog. Somewhere beyond that gray veil lay the mainland, full of light and laughter and warmth. He could hardly remember it now. His breath fogged the glass. Then faintly he heard it, a whisper, soft as wind, through reeds. He turned, wand raised, but saw only shadows. "Who's there?" The voice came again, clearer this time, seeming to echo from the very walls. "Below, below." Ronan's skin prickled. He had been told never to go beneath the lower cells. never to stray into the catacombs where the old magic lingered. Yet something in that voice tugged at him, gentle and insistent. Torch in hand, he descended the spiral stair. The air grew colder with each step. By the time he reached the final landing, his breath came in clouds. The floor was slick with ice. The torches here burned with blue flame, their light dim and uncertain. The whisper guided him through a narrow corridor to a door half buried in frost. Strange runes were carved into its surface, half erased by time. He could not read them, but their power thrummed beneath his fingertips. When he touched the handle, the metal burned him, but he did not let go. The whisper filled his mind completely now. Free us, the warmth, the light. The door shuddered open. The chamber beyond was vast and circular, filled with mist that glowed faintly blue. At its center stood the pedestal, and upon it, the orb. It pulsed with a steady rhythm as though alive. Ronan stepped forward, entranced. The closer he came, the warmer the air grew until the chill vanished entirely. He felt at peace, as if all his fears had melted away. "Are you alive?" he murmured. The orb answered with a whisper that echoed inside his skull. "We are waiting. So long. So cold. Bring us warmth, child." He reached out a trembling hand. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, pain tore through him. His breath left his lungs in a single cry. The warmth turned to fire, then to ice. His memories poured from him like water, his home, his mother's voice, the sound of laughter. And in their place came hunger. Endless, gnawing hunger. Above in the prison halls, the Dementors stirred as one. They rose from their drifting paths and turned toward the depths. For the first time in centuries, they felt something. A pulse. A call. It was their birthright returning to them. The orb blazed with black light. Ronan fell to his knees, his body trembling. The shadows within the glass broke free, swirling around him. They poured into his mouth, his eyes, his very soul. He screamed, and his voice was not his own. Then with a sound like cracking ice, the light vanished. The orb went dark. When the other wardens found him hours later, Ronan Blythe was standing before the pedestal, eyes empty, skin pale as moonlight. He spoke softly, as if reciting a dream. "They are coming. The hunger wakes." He died that night, his heart turned to ice. From then on, the Dementors grew restless. They no longer lingered silently by the cells, but prowled the corridors in pairs, their presence heavier, more suffocating. The guards reported seeing their shapes crowding near the lower gates, pressing against the stone as though listening for something beneath. Within a year, prisoners began dying in greater numbers. Some withered away, without cause. Others simply stopped breathing. The air grew colder, the walls dripping with frost even in summer, and yet the ministry refused to close the prison. "Azkaban does what it was meant to do," said the minister. "It breaks those who cannot be redeemed." None saw that it was Azkaban itself that was breaking free. Deep below, the cracked seal pulsed faintly once more, each beat a little stronger than before. The whispers had returned, weaving through the stone. They spoke now not to one, but to many, to every Dementor that drifted above. "Come home," they murmured. "The warmth waits." And though the Dementors had no faces, no eyes, those who dared look upon them swore they saw a change, a new purpose behind their endless hungry drift. A storm gathered over the island that would not end for months. Lightning struck the sea, thunder rolled through the halls, and the orb throbbed in answer. The seal of Acrisdus was failing. The hunger was awakening once again. The winter that followed was the harshest in living memory. The sea froze far beyond the cliffs of Azkaban, and no ships dared approach. The sun vanished behind iron-gray clouds, leaving the island cloaked in an endless dusk. Even the Dementors moved more slowly now, gliding through the corridors like shadows grown weary of their own weight. Yet something deeper stirred beneath their stillness, a tension, a waiting, as if they knew that the old magic which bound them was fraying strand by strand. In the offices of the ministry, unease grew like a spreading frost. Reports from Azkaban arrived irregularly, sometimes carried by half-mad messengers who claimed they could no longer dream. Some letters were written in trembling hands, their ink smeared and frozen where the quill had fallen. A few ended mid-sentence. The head of magical law enforcement, Thaddeus Pruin, summoned his council. "There are forces at work beyond our comprehension," he said gravely, setting one of the trembling parchments upon the table. "If the guards are failing, we must know why." A young auror named Helena Rowe, descendant of Damocles, spoke quietly from the shadows of the chamber. "We have used that island for too long. Every dark thing we cast there has taken root. My great-grandfather thought to enslave despair itself, but it has grown beyond our command." Pruin frowned. "Azkaban has served the ministry faithfully for centuries. You speak as if it were alive." Helena met his eyes. "Perhaps it is." The council dismissed her fears, as councils often do when truth wears the mask of madness. Yet when no more reports came, Pruin had little choice but to act. A rescue party was dispatched. 12 wizards, strong and well-trained, led by Helena herself. They reached the island after 3 days of violent storms. The sea lay thick with ice, and the ship groaned as it broke a path toward the shore. Even before they disembarked, the chill sank into their bones. The fortress stood waiting above them, black against the sky, its towers sharp as teeth. No smoke rose from its chimneys, no light burned within its walls. When they crossed the gate, the air grew thick, heavy as water and colder than death. The first body lay just inside the courtyard. The man's wand was still raised, frozen into his fingers, his face pale and empty. The others followed in silence, their breaths forming clouds. Helena touched the body's brow. Frost crackled beneath her glove. "They didn't even struggle," she murmured. "Whatever came for them, they welcomed it." The group advanced into the main hall. The torches along the walls still burned, but their flames were blue, casting no warmth. Every sound echoed too loudly. Even their heartbeats seemed intrusive. As they passed through the corridor of cells, one of the aurors, young, red-haired Lennox Crane, paused, frowning. "Listen," he whispered. From the darkness beyond the bars came a low murmur, like the sighing of the sea. It rose and fell, sometimes breaking into what might have been laughter or weeping. "Prisoners?" another asked. Helena shook her head. "No one's left alive here." They reached the central hall where the guards once gathered. The runes carved into the floor still glowed faintly beneath a layer of frost. In their center lay a great crack that had not been there before, and from it came a dim light, pulsing like a heartbeat. Helena knelt beside it, her wand casting silver light into the fissure. Beneath the stone something moved. "The seal's failing," she said softly. "Whatever binds the Dementors, it's weakening." At her words, the torches guttered out. The hall plunged into darkness. A single breath of wind swept through, cold enough to snuff magic itself. When their wands reignited, 3 of the aurors were gone. "Form ranks," Helena shouted. Her voice echoed strangely, as though the hall were much larger than before. Shapes emerged from the darkness, scores of them gliding silently through the air. The Dementors surrounded them in a slow, spiraling dance. But there was something different in their movement now, something more deliberate. They were not aimless shadows. They were a tide flowing toward the fissure. One of the wizards cast a Patronus, a stag bright and fierce. Its light filled the hall for a heartbeat before flickering, dimming, and dying. The creature's silver glow was devoured by the black mist rising from the crack in the floor. Helena felt a pressure against her mind, a whisper threading through her thoughts. "You have her blood," it said. "The blood of the one who bound us. Let it be repaid." Her knees buckled as the temperature plunged. The others shouted, their voices muffled as though buried in snow. She forced her wand upright, gasping, "Expecto Patronum." Light burst forth, a phoenix of blinding silver. It soared high, shrieking defiance, scattering the Dementors before it. For an instant, warmth returned. The fissure sealed part way, the mist retreating, but the strain tore through her. The phoenix faltered, its light dimming. The whispers surged louder now, 1,000 voices murmuring at once. The warmth, the light, the promise. Lennox seized her arm. "We must go. There's nothing to save here." He dragged her toward the gate, the others following, stumbling through the corridors that twisted and changed like a living maze. The fortress groaned, its walls trembling. At last they reached the outer courtyard. Snow was falling in heavy, silent flakes, though no storm had been in the sky a moment before. The sea was gone. Only ice stretched to the horizon. Behind them the gates slammed shut of their own accord. A deep rumble rolled through the ground. The fortress stood tall and silent once more. They escaped aboard their ship, 7 of 12, still breathing. For 3 days they sailed through frozen fog, never once glimpsing the sun. When they finally reached the mainland, the ship's timbers were rimed with frost as thick as glass, and every man aboard bore the mark of Azkaban's cold in his bones. In the weeks that followed, Helena Rowe spoke little of what she had seen. The ministry questioned her, but she gave them only fragments. "The Dementors are no longer merely keepers," she said. "They have a will. They remember." Her report was sealed, her warnings ignored. Yet strange things began to happen in the years that followed. Prisoners in Azkaban no longer merely withered. They vanished altogether, leaving only frost where they had lain. The warden sent word that sometimes at night he saw the Dementors gathered around the central hall, their cloaks drawn back, their faces turned toward the ground, as though in worship. He never said what they worshipped, and so Azkaban remained, drifting through time as it had through centuries past, a monument of despair, its stones whispering the name of its first master. Beneath its roots, the pulse continued faint and steady, awaiting the one who would finally break the seal. The sea roared endlessly around the island, though no wind moved and no waves broke. And in that eternal stillness, the Dementors waited, silent, patient, and hungrier than ever before. Years passed, and with them came new generations who had forgotten the first whispers of Azkaban's making. The ministry had grown arrogant in its authority, convinced that all dangers could be contained by decree. The fortress had become nothing more than a grim necessity, a monument to law, feared but seldom questioned. Those who served there did so not out of loyalty, but because the ministry paid well for courage and silence. Yet the island itself had not changed. The same storms rolled across its cliffs. The same mist hung heavy above its towers. Beneath the endless gray, the Dementors glided in ceaseless rhythm, guardians and prisoners both of the darkness that bound them. But now, the ancient magic that had once sealed their birth began again to stir. The orb of Echrisdus, long cracked and forgotten in the buried chambers, had begun to glow once more. The fissure that Helena Rowe had forced, shut centuries before, now widened like a wound. The heartbeat of the island grew stronger. It began with small signs. A prisoner would scream at night that he heard voices in the stone. The guards found frost blooming upon the walls. Even in midsummer, the Dementors gathered often in the courtyard, their movements strange, their hoods lifting as though listening to something no living ear could hear. One warden, Gideon Mulready, kept a secret journal. He was a quiet man, long in service, and though the cold had dulled his spirit, it had not yet devoured his mind. In careful script, he recorded what he saw. The creatures move differently now. They no longer drift as before. They follow the corridors as if drawn to a point below the keep. The air hums there like the breath of some great beast sleeping. Last night I heard the stones whisper my name. Soon after, Mulready vanished. His journal was found near the stair to the lower halls, its final page spattered with frost. They're calling me down. I can hear them beneath the floor. Perhaps if I go, I will see what they are waiting for. After his disappearance, the remaining wardens sent desperate messages to the ministry. But the seas were fierce, and no owl could cross the storms that now surrounded the island. They were alone. Among them was a witch named Myra Finn, youngest of the keepers, who still possessed enough hope to fear. When she saw the first lights rise from the lower halls, blue shifting like flames seen beneath water, she knew that something beneath the fortress had awakened. For 3 days and nights, the Dementors gathered there, circling the sealed gate to the catacombs. They neither fed nor moved away. Mayra dared to watch them from a balcony above. They seemed to pulse in unison, as though breathing together, their cloaks rising and falling like the tide. On the 4th night, the ground shuddered. The sound rolled through the fortress like distant thunder. Mayra fled to the upper chambers, but everywhere she turned, the cold followed. Frost crawled over the ceiling, spreading in branching veins. The torches sputtered and died. From the depths came a long, low moan, a sound too vast to belong to any living creature. The sea answered with a crash against the cliffs, and lightning tore across the sky. Then she saw it, light bursting upward from the cracks in the floor, flooding the hallways with blue fire. The runes of Echrisdus, dormant for centuries, flared once more. The Dementors turned as one, their hoods lifted toward the ceiling, their mouths opening in silent ecstasy. A wind rose within the fortress, howling through every corridor. Mayra clutched the iron railing, her breath freezing before her eyes. The orb had awakened. Far below, within the heart of the earth, it shone like a star, a great sphere of black glass, its core alive with swirling shadows. The seal that bound it cracked fully open. Out of it poured a mist darker than night, rising in waves that took form and scattered through the halls. The Dementors rushed to meet it, their cloaks thrashing like wings. The black wind merged with them, vanishing into their hollow bodies. The temperature plunged until the air itself screamed. Mayra fell to her knees, her tears freezing upon her cheeks. Through the storm, she saw visions. The dark wizard Echrisdus standing before his creation, his hands raised, his face filled not with triumph but terror. The Auror Edgar Vane sealing the darkness at the cost of his life. Marilla Crane riding by torchlight, her quill shaking as she warned of the hunger that would never die. The island was remembering. Mara forced herself to her feet. The words from the old records returned to her mind. Echrisdus's spell of binding spoken in the ancient tongue. Her mother had been a scholar. She had taught her fragments of those same words once in a forgotten lullaby. With what strength remained, Mayra raised her wand and began to chant. The storm screamed against her, tearing at her cloak, but her voice rose above it. Recludo anima, vincitio aeternum. Light flared from her wand, silver and fierce. The Dementors shrieked, retreating. The orb's glow faltered. The shadows writhed, struggling against her will. But the spell required more than strength. It demanded sacrifice. She felt it draining her, pulling the warmth from her veins. Still she spoke, her voice hoarse but unbroken. Recludo anima. A final burst of light erupted from the floor, blinding and pure. The storm ceased, the sea stilled. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. When the light faded, Mayra lay motionless beside the railing. The cracks in the stone had sealed. The orb's glow had dimmed once more to a faint pulse. The Dementors drifted aimlessly, weakened but not destroyed. They had been driven back but not undone. The ministry would later find her body when the storm subsided. In her hand she still clutched her wand, its tip frosted with silver light. They buried her in secret, her name erased from the records, for fear that others might ask what truly stirred beneath Azkaban. Yet those who came after her, the new guards, the prisoners, even the Dementors themselves, felt her presence in the halls. Some said that on the coldest nights, a soft voice could be heard, whispering through the corridors, a lullaby in a language older than any spell. It was Mayra's voice holding the seal together with the last fragments of her soul, and so Azkaban slept once more, bound by sacrifice, shrouded in silence. But the island's heart still beat in the depths, slow and steady, waiting for the day when even Mayra's light would fade. When that moment came, the orb would open again, and this time there would be no voice left to speak the words of binding, only hunger and the endless, icy sea. The centuries slipped by like shadows on dark water, and the world beyond Azkaban changed 1,000 times. Empires rose and crumbled, wizards fought and fell, light and darkness traded places again and again, yet the island endured, untouched by time or mercy. It was the one constant in a shifting age. A scar upon the sea, its towers glistening black beneath a sky that seldom saw the sun. Within those walls, the Dementors ruled utterly. The ministry had long ceased to send wardens in great number, for most went mad within months or else never returned. The creatures kept order in their own dreadful way, obeying no words, yet all was feeding. The prison became a place not of punishment, but of erasure, a void into which men vanished, and from which no sound escaped. Still, Azkaban was never truly silent. Beneath the endless wind, one could always hear the faint whispering of the sea against the cliffs, and if one listened long enough, something deeper, soft, rhythmic, and terrible, the slow pulse of the island's heart. It was into this age that Cassian Prior, an auror of the ministry, was sent. He was a man of clear eyes and stubborn purpose, chosen for his unshakable discipline. The ministry had grown uneasy once again. Prisoners had begun dying in their sleep, not from despair, but from something stranger. Their bodies remained whole, but their magic, every trace of it, was gone. The guards reported seeing a new light in the lower halls, faint and red, as though the fortress itself were bleeding. Cassian's orders were simple: investigate, report, and, if necessary, re-establish control. He arrived upon the island in the teeth of a storm. The sea tossed his boat like driftwood, and when he set foot on the slick stones of the pier, the wind cut through his cloak like knives. A lone warden met him, a pale man with hollow eyes and frost in his beard. "You should not have come," the warden murmured. "The air here, it has changed. The Dementors no longer answer." "They never truly answered," Cassian replied, but when he stepped through the gate, he understood what the man meant. The cold was not merely of winter. It pressed upon the mind, draining thought, erasing joy. He had trained against the Dementor's power, carried the memory of his mother's laughter to summon his Patronus, yet even that warmth seemed dim now, as though the very idea of happiness were fading from the world. He climbed the winding stair to the upper halls, passing row upon row of empty cells. The prisoners were kept below these days, far beneath the surface where even the cries of madness could not reach the light. The air smelled of iron and salt and old death. As he descended, Cassian felt the magic around him shifting, unstable. The walls seemed to hum faintly. In some places, frost patterns formed into shapes, eyes, hands, mouths open in silent screams. At the bottom of the last stair, he found a door of black stone carved with runes that glowed faintly red. A narrow crack ran down its center, bleeding thin streams of mist. The warden who had guided him stopped there. "No one goes beyond this door," he said softly. "Not anymore." Cassian's gaze hardened. When did this begin? After the last storm. The light came first, then the whispering. "What does it say?" The warden shivered. "It speaks every language and none, but the meaning is the same. It is hungry." Cassian raised his wand. "Open it." The warden hesitated, then obeyed. The runes flared, the door groaned, and the air rushed out like the exhalation of something vast and ancient. Beyond lay a cavern half flooded with seawater. The ceiling dripped constantly, the droplets freezing before they struck the floor. In the center stood the pedestal, its stone cracked, its bindings broken. Upon it the orb of Acristus pulsed once more, no longer faint but burning with red light shot through with black veins. Cassian felt its pull at once. His magic recoiled as though in pain. The air around it shimmered, and in that shimmer he saw shapes, faces twisted by despair, hands reaching out, fragments of souls bound within the orb. He approached carefully. The Dementors were already there, 100 of them hovering in a slow, circling motion. They did not attack. They seemed to worship. The red light reflected upon their tattered cloaks, making them look like embers in a dying fire. Cassian raised his wand. "In the name of the Ministry of Magic, I command—" The words froze upon his tongue. A voice spoke, not aloud, but inside his mind. It was deep and endless, like the sea itself. "He called us from the dark. You would bind us again?" Cassian's jaw tightened. "You are abominations. You feed upon what makes us human." "We were made from your kind," the voice replied. "We are what you cast away." The Dementors turned their hooded faces toward him. For the first time he felt not hatred from them, but expectation. They waited. The orb pulsed faster, its glow filling the cavern. Images flashed before Cassian's eyes, Echristus drawing threads of silver from screaming captives. Edgar Vane sealing the first of the creatures within the fortress. Marilla Crane's trembling hand writing her final warning. Maera Finn standing upon the balcony, her wand raised in futile defiance. He saw it all as if he had lived each life, and then he understood. The orb was not merely a prison, it was a mirror of the soul. It contained every emotion it had ever consumed, every shred of joy and fear and love torn from those who had died within Azkaban's reach. He realized too late that it was calling to him, not as prey, but as heir. The ground shook. Cracks split the walls, spilling frost and flame together. The Dementors surged forward, swirling around him. He summoned his Patronus, a wolf of brilliant silver, but its light barely pierced the gloom. The voice spoke again. "You are his blood," he gasped. "Whose?" "Echristus." The wolf faltered. The silver light flickered, dimmed. Cassian fell to one knee, his wand trembling. Visions burned in his mind. Centuries of hunger, of darkness. The island's curse was not born of accident. It was inheritance. The blood of its maker ran still in those who came to end it. The Dementors closed in, their cloaks billowing. Cassian felt his warmth slipping away. He thought of the world beyond the sea, of sunlight, of laughter, of peace, and forced the memory outward. The wolf roared, brighter now, shattering the nearest wraiths into mist. But the orb flared red, and from its heart burst a shadow. Larger than any Dementor, a form vast and formless, its face hidden in fire and frost. The air screamed around it. Cassian understood then that this was no creature of death. It was despair itself, the remnant of Echristus's soul, bound and twisted beyond recognition. With his last strength, he lifted his wand high and cried out the words that had once saved the world. Recludo anima, vincitio aeternum. Light erupted, pure, blinding, searing. The Dementors shrieked, drawn back into the orb. The shadow wailed and shattered into dust. The fortress trembled, stones cracking, towers collapsing into the sea. Cassian fell upon the cold floor, his strength spent, his breath shallow. As the cavern caved in around him, he smiled faintly. The light faded, but peace lingered. When the sea stilled and the sky cleared days later, Azkaban stood once more, its towers scarred but whole. The orb was gone. The Dementors remained, fewer now, drifting aimlessly, their hunger muted but not destroyed. The Ministry recorded Cassian Pryor as lost in duty. They never knew that his blood had sealed the island for a final time. And beneath the waves, where the fortress's roots reached into the dark, a faint red glow pulsed once, then faded forever, until the world should forget the name of Azkaban and remember only the cold.